make it into the magnets, but you'll get the same GT label and the same GT opportunities, whatever they are, as a child who's at the 65th percentile. And somebody who scores at the 95th percentile is probably got the ability to go faster and needs more challenge than a child at the 65th percentile, even though they're both above average.
Mm-hmm.
You get a phenomenon like in my home elementary school, 80% of the kids are identified as GT in the second grade screening. And so, of course, the whole school is treated as GT, because what are you going to, you know, are you going to distinguish out the 20% who didn't make the 63rd percentile cutoff and treat them differently from 80% of the student body? Of course you're not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the end, the label ends up meaning very different, very little. It's not used for placement. It's not used for determining who does and doesn't get enrichment. It's essentially meaningless, except that Maryland state law requires Montgomery County to identify its gifted population. So that's the function it serves. It serves to be able to check off that check stand, you know, that checklist on the state requirements that we identified our gifted students.
So you mentioned like mask of giftedness criteria. Do you know what that is?
I believe it is parent advocacy and teacher and staff advocacy. So they ask teachers and staff to look for students who maybe didn't score that well on the tests, but still meet the criteria, in their opinion, are still above average and should be, and you know, and have the ability, if they get enrichment opportunities, to move faster than the rest of the class and identify them as gifted. So there's a list of something like 6 criteria. You know, there's your parents think you're gifted, do your teachers think you're gifted, does the staff think you're gifted, did you do well on the math and spatial part of the cognitive test, did you do well on the English and language part of this cognitive test. That's 5, there's a 6th, I can't remember what it is. And if you meet the criteria on 2 of them, you get the GT label, a minimum of 2. So you can, you know, do lousy on all the tests and your grades. That's it, of course, your grades. Your academic record K through 2 is the other thing they look at. So you can have no criteria of giftedness in anything other than parents and staff and still get the label. And what tends to happen in the unmasked population is that they get the parent advocacy, because these parents are savvy enough to fill out the form. A lot of times parents don't fill out the form. You know, they don't speak English. Mm-hmm. Even though the forms are put out in other languages, they come from cultures where parents are not that involved in school, so they don't, let me start that one over again. Jillian, either come all the way in or stay all the way out.
Where are your roommates? It's just Isabella, and she has a skating competition.
All right, so the parent form tends to over-identify advantaged kids because their parents are more likely to fill out the form. They're more likely to be paying attention. They're more likely to understand the implications of not filling it out. The grades are more likely to over-identify advantaged populations because the parents are more likely to pay attention to whether the kids are doing their homework and how they're doing on the assessments and gotten them supports if they were not doing as well as the parents thought they should be doing, or expressing expectations at home that you will do well at school, because all of those things play into how well kids do at school and what their grades look like. So those criteria over-identify advantaged populations versus disadvantaged populations, and that's what ends up creating this 37% number, which is silly. I mean, you know, Montgomery County has a very highly educated population compared to most of the country. If we had a 20% rate identification, I would think that was within the realm of reason, even though it's higher than the national average, because our education level is higher than the national average. But 37% is not something that can be realistic. And I think it's a result of a misguided attempt to both do something they should be doing, which is get behind the masks, and avoid the political problems of not applying the same criteria to everybody. But I don't think the elimination of the label would, in and of itself, change what gifted students get in school. What it would do, though, is be one more strike. Ernie, you ruined it.
Sorry, that was like take my phone. The passcode's 4939. Do whatever you want.
That's an accident, I swear.
Turn off the sound, please.
I was trying to put him on the couch, so he squeaked, and I got really scared.
No, this is just like
5949.
4939.
Oh.
It's just like that Sesame Street song.
Sorry.
Ernie, you ruined it.
This is all on tape.
Yes, I know it is.
Have fun editing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where were we?
Oh,
right. So if you got rid of the GT label, it wouldn't change anything about the educational opportunities, but what it would do is be one more opportunity for MCPS to ignore the existence of gifted students outside the magnet program. That's why I opposed it. I wouldn't oppose the label if they actually had gifted education. I mean, what you call it doesn't really matter. But it is the national term of art. State law requires that we identify and serve gifted children. And if you get rid of the label, then you have yet another way to avoid serving them. As long as they're being labeled, at least you have some advocacy point as parents and as a community to stand on in complaining that they don't get served. So that's why I opposed it.
yeah, so before we went to that, we were talking about the common denominator.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you were done with that or not.
No, I don't think it's the lowest common denominator, but I think it's a single common denominator. It's high for some people. For some kids, it will raise them up, and that's great.
Mm-hmm.
It's appropriate for some kids, and that's also great. It's too low for others. That's the problem with it. It's not that it itself is too low overall, it's that it's the only one. There should be a different cut point measurement for students who already meet that standard when they start the school year, and what they ought to be doing, the school system ought to be doing, is measuring everybody at the beginning of the year as well as the end to see if they already meet the on-grade level standard. What's so funny?
Nothing, I'm just sorry.
Do you need her to leave?
No, it's not that, just
All I'm doing is liking all my photos on Instagram.
oh dear.
We told her to do whatever she
Yes,
wanted.
Okay, so Common Core explains that its standards will help parents and teachers know how well their students are doing overall instead of just compared to the state or their school. So how do you feel this affects students who are either ahead or behind the school?
Well, unless it's measuring how well they do compared to other students who are ahead, it doesn't do anything for students who are ahead. If your student is ahead, you already know that he's exceeding the standard, the national standard for everybody. So just having it be a national standard rather than a state standard doesn't help you if your student already exceeds it. For students who are below, that could potentially be more informative depending on how the measurement is reported. And I think that could be useful. I mean, in other words, it might be a mechanism to prevent states from pretending that they are doing a good job of educating students with disabilities or challenges because they have to measure it against a national standard instead of a lower state standard. Some states have lowered their standards in order to pass NCLB with disadvantaged kids, so they just lower the standard for everybody, and if you apply Common Core, you can't do that. So that's good, but it doesn't do anything for the students who are above the standard.
So that's everything I have. Is there anything else you want to add?
I really think that the absence of any assessment above the minimum threshold cut point is a huge problem. And I really would, I don't object to the proficiency standard. I think it is harder than the MSA and other state standards used to be. I think that's a good thing. I think that's appropriate. I also think it's appropriate for the on-grade level standards to be more aspirational. To give you an example, 1/3 of our students in Montgomery County leave high school without passing Algebra 2. Because historically, and this is historically going back over decades, it was true when I was in high school too, the high school graduation diploma standard for math was that you had to pass geometry. And if you passed geometry, if you took 9th and 10th grade, Algebra 1 geometry, and then you decided you didn't want to do any more math, you didn't have to take any more math. You could stop there. Or if it took you until 12th grade to pass geometry, that was okay too, because that was the minimum threshold for the diploma. The state has now changed that to require that students take math in high school all 4 years, regardless of what level they are. There's no exception for students who went out of high school math in 9th or 10th grade. That's a problem. We're going to work on that. But that means that the state now requires you to continue past geometry. Montgomery County now, I believe, is going to, maybe the state is going to, I can't remember if this is a state standard or a county standard, but either way it's going to apply here, is that the graduation requirement will be Algebra 2 rather than geometry, I believe. you have to pass Algebra 2 to get a diploma in Maryland, which, that is an appropriate raising of the standards, but it's, for somebody who's gonna finish Algebra 2 in 8th grade, that's clearly too low, right? And there should be some requirement that schools show that they can take a student who passed Algebra 2 in 8th grade or 9th grade and did something else with them the rest of the time. Okay, so that's good. Making Algebra 2 a graduation requirement, I think, is an improvement. Making Algebra 1 the 8th grade level, on-grade level class, though, strikes me as odd. In reality, where right now 1/3 of our students don't pass Algebra 2, why are we trying to push 80% of our 8th graders through Algebra 1? Okay, because clearly that's a higher percentage than are ready to take Algebra 1 in 8th grade. They can't even finish Algebra 2 by 12th grade, right? But that's the standard that they're setting, and a lot of people at MCPS tell me, well, it's because we believe that with the right teaching and the Curriculum 2.0 curriculum, most students are capable of passing algebra in 8th grade. And I say, great. And they say, so our goal is to get them to pass algebra, to measure how many students pass algebra with a C or better in 8th grade. And I've asked, why do you want to take algebra in 8th grade? And one of the things I was told was because you have to complete algebra in 8th grade to preserve the option of AP Calculus, which is true, you do. And I thought that was a very odd answer for two reasons. The first is, calculus is not a requirement for most bachelor's degrees. So why on earth would you treat completion of calculus as the on-grade level college and career readiness standard? It's the introductory college level math class. The idea that everybody should be on track to complete it in 12th grade doesn't make sense to me, because plenty of people will go all the way through college without doing calculus. Okay, so leaving aside, though, whether calculus is an appropriate aspiration for the entire student body, which I firmly believe, although it's a great class, I hope you'll take it, that it's not an appropriate aspiration for the entire student body, because not everybody is that into math, or needs to be. How many students who only pass Algebra 1 with a C ever take calculus successfully? I asked the head of the math department that question, and he just looked at me. It's like he'd never thought about that. They have no data. If you don't do better than a C in Algebra 1, you're going to have a hard time passing Algebra 2, much less calculus. And furthermore, if you're taking a high school class in middle school, you should be doing better than a C. And if you can't do better than a C, if you try and don't do better than a C, you should take it again in high school, where it belongs. And so the idea that it is appropriate to measure, for any purpose whatsoever, how many students complete algebra in 8th grade with a C or better is absurd. All right? And it's not an appropriate common denominator. All right? So that's an example, I guess.
So is that all?
I guess so. I could talk about a lot of different aspects of this, but I think this is probably enough for what you want. Right?
It has to fit into 7 minutes, so
Yeah,
probably.